Hello, I'm Michael Ryan. Thank you for joining me as I take you on the case of a celebrity chef and author who presents with acute depression and alcohol and drug use disorder. Anthony Michael Bourdain is an American celebrity chef, author, and travel writer documentarian, most notable for his famous documentary series on CNN. He is a 61-year-old male who describes himself as having a lethally destructive nature, chronic depression, a substance use disorder, heroin and cocaine, and feels, in his words, less than. Anthony feels a constant sense of aloneness and often feels like he doesn't fit in socially, even with groups of friends or when surrounded by fans and acquaintances who admire and respect him for his professionalism. He states that he does not feel appreciated in spite of having been recognized in his career for his outstanding achievements. He is a leader in his field and states that he has a loving relationship with his long-term girlfriend, who he met after his divorce. His family is the most important thing to him, but he says he struggles to let people in, especially those who love him and care for him. Early in his life, Anthony struggled with bouts of depression, insomnia, and social anxiety that he controlled through the use of cocaine and heroin and alcohol. Now 61 years old, Anthony is looking for help in putting his, quote, demons, as he calls them, out of his mind so that he can sleep at night and appreciate his life. Everyone, he says, tells him he has a great life, but he doesn't feel it. He feels he's unable to appreciate his life and always feels like he has to do more and be better. He recognizes his problem is in his head, as he says, but he doesn't know how to fix himself. He has never tried any type of therapy and told me that he trusts me but doesn't trust shrinks or those in the medical field because they're in it for the money. I was an angry kid, he stated. For whatever reason, I was definitely a very angry, bitter, nihilistic, destructive, and self-destructive kid, and often had a, quote, psychotic rage, unquote, throughout his life. He states he is awful to people at work, abusive and bullying to his colleagues, adding, quote, I hurt, disappointed, and offended many, many people, and I regret it a lot. The defining part of Anthony's life is his abusive and destructive relationship with drugs. His exposure started early. He's admitted to taking part in drugs from the time he was a young teenager. Things got worse in his 20s as he entered the harsh and demanding restaurant world. Quote, hardly a decision was made without drugs. Eventually, he became addicted to harder substances in the 1980s. Quote, cooking in the 1980s and 1990s involved a lot of illegal drugs, cigarettes, late nights, and pretty self-destructive behavior. That was how we got through the day in restaurants back then. He states that although he asked for help with his drug use in the past, he ends up not taking it. He relies on himself, he says, and says he ends up ignoring the advice he gets from doctors and therapists, but states that he doesn't know why he doesn't stick with their advice. In his statement prior to our first interview, he says, I have this constant urge, I've always had it, to want to just kill myself. Normal people don't think like that, I know, and I want to be normal. Anthony calls himself, quote, an unhappy soul, and after his marriage ended in 2014, he stated he was, quote, aimless and regularly suicidal. I find myself in a spiral of depression that can last for days, and admitted to feeling alone. He says, I communicate for a living, but I'm terrible at communicating with people I care about, adding, I feel kind of like a freak and I feel kind of isolated. At the end of his statement, he states that he suffers in silence and doesn't do much to tackle his issues head on. He says, I battle with a range of mental health issues, including OCD, depression, bipolar episodes, and addictive qualities. He states that part of what drives him to such a dark place is that he feels he is somebody who has been running away from his deeper problems for a long time. Quote, I tend to paper over problems both through my work addiction and through my sense of forward momentum. And he acknowledges that part of his likability as a TV personality is this constant striving to be more and do more. He notes he feels irritable, moody, and has an insulting demeanor towards celebrity chefs and authority figures. During the intake interview, he confessed, quote, "There have been times, honestly, in my life that I figured I've had a good run. Why not just do this stupid thing, this selfish thing, jump off a cliff into water of indeterminate depth?" As an Adlerian, I am keying in on the importance of social psychology and a positive view of human nature. I see people like Anthony as being influenced more by social than by biological forces. People are in control of their fate and they're not victims of it. I believe that interpretations of early events have a continuing influence on each individual, and that individuals create a distinctive lifestyle at an early age, not merely shaped by childhood experiences, and that this lifestyle tends to remain relatively constant and defines one's beliefs about life and ways of dealing with life. As an Adlerian therapist, my goal is to help Anthony identify and change his mistaken beliefs about himself, others, and life. I'll work collaboratively with Anthony to enable him to reach the goals he defines for himself. The primary goal with Anthony is to help him overcome feelings of discouragement and feeling that he needs to be and do more. I'll help him see that his high standards he sets for himself are goals that are really unattainable. I will also help him to modify and restructure his mistaken beliefs that he is, quote, not good enough, and re-educate Anthony's perception of himself so that he can see and accept his accomplishments and achievements. Based on Anthony's description of his current problems, his continued untreated depression, substance use disorder, and feelings of wanting to die, my hope is to understand Anthony's view of himself and the world. This can only be done through mutual respect and a joint effort. The client-therapist relationship involves both the client and the counselor to actively explore the client's past experiences. But as an Adlerian, I will work to emphasize with Anthony that he is responsible for his behavior. We'll be engaging in discussions that will help Anthony see the connection between his need as a young adult to turn to drugs and alcohol instead of dealing with his feelings and how those affect his current situation. With trust and honesty in our relationship and sustained attention on the quality of our relationship, we can positively change his maladaptive lifestyle. As an Adlerian therapist, in the initial stage of counseling, the techniques I will be using will be more around paying attention to Anthony's subjective experiences through attending and listening with empathy, following his subjective experience as closely as possible, and identifying and clarifying goals. I intend to give Anthony homework that will help reinforce some of the positive behaviors and thinking we'll be working on in session. Techniques like positive self-talk and catching oneself. However, my emphasis is not on techniques per se, but on listening attentively. As a Adlerian therapist, I am most concerned with helping Anthony reach his full potential. This type of therapy has been applied to a broad range of human problems and to alleviating social conditions that interfere with a person's growth. Because Anthony is circumspect of working with counselors and therapists, it is important that trust in our relationship be achieved up front. Some life tasks that I will work with Anthony on better managing are the tasks of friendship, work, and intimacy. Anthony's past experiences in each of these areas has ingrained in him some mistaken assumptions that need to be corrected in order for him to reach his full potential. In his friendships at work, he identifies choppy relationships, suddenly cutting off communications with former friends in work and in personal domains. In his current situation with his longtime girlfriend of 8 years, Anthony as he says, is unable to be vulnerable with her and express his feelings. As an Adlerian, I will communicate to Anthony that 3 life tasks are universal to all people, and that these tasks cannot be avoided and have to be resolved socially. We are communal beings, and therefore getting along with others, friendship, and cooperation are essential to living full and productive lives. Next, dividing the labor and making a contribution to the whole is also essential. Contributions we make to others in the usefulness of our time on earth directly relate to meaning and value in each person's life. Thirdly, we all need intimacy in our lives. We all need to get along with both our same sex and the other sex. We all live better if we treat each other with mutual respect and an appreciation of difference. In our initial interview, Anthony indicated he is the oldest of 2 children. His younger brother by 5 years is David, an architect living in New York. Anthony believes that his brother is affected by Anthony's drug use and states that they have a love-hate relationship, or that Anthony gets frustrated when his brother suggests he get help with his drug abuse and depression. Anthony's entire family is supportive, he says, of his career and his life, and the family meets in person during the holidays in November and December. Anthony believes that he has the best friends in the world and that they are good listeners, and he enjoys drinking after work with them. He says that his friends are work acquaintances and confides that he doesn't have any real close friends. His closest friend, Bobby, died of a drug overdose about 10 years ago. In regards to work and occupation, Anthony states that he has achieved a lot and has excelled in the restaurant business and as a writer and a documentarian, but he doesn't have the feeling of accomplishment or satisfaction. He feels the need for work, to do work, and he is a self-described workaholic. In the category of love and intimacy, Anthony is separated from his girlfriend for at least 2 weeks of the month due to his job. He feels that his relationship with his girlfriend is great, but confides that he doesn't feel like he can just be himself with her and be vulnerable. He says he is afraid of being vulnerable. From the initial interview with Anthony, I'll summarize some key discussion points and expand on Anthony's responses to the questions about the 3 life tasks. Early in life, Anthony became responsible for caring for his younger brother due to his parents' inability to care for the boys. In adolescence, both Anthony and his brother gravitated toward marijuana, alcohol, cocaine, and heroin use, and both got into legal trouble in high school. In adulthood, Anthony had a falling out with both parents and worked long hours in the restaurant and food service industry, excelling at his craft and becoming a workaholic, as he says. In my estimation, Anthony, quote, ran away from a dysfunctional household and the responsibilities of caring for his younger brother and sought a safer environment in the workplace, where eventually he felt he had more control over his life. While working, Anthony earned his culinary arts degree and found a new freedom in the workplace. He felt appreciated and valued in the workplace, and over time, the workplace offered new challenges and met the need of safety that Anthony sought in his home growing up. In the workplace, his life is safe, comfortable, predictable, and he knows exactly what he needs to do to succeed and feel safe and secure. In the home, as a young adult and an adult, Anthony struggles to find the same sense of safety, security, and predictableness that he used to experience as a chef. In his current work situation, success has also brought him further away from the predictable and familiar nature in the work environment that he became so used to. The achievements and growth he feels in his career today are causing in him feelings of insecurity, lack of control, anxiety, and depression. The conflict that Anthony is experiencing between the two worlds, love and intimacy, and work and occupation, are represented in his juggling the challenges of shifting work and new projects and the desire to form a relationship with his longtime girlfriend. When these needs collide and conflict, Anthony's old behaviors and coping mechanisms lead him to continue to seek drugs and alcohol. In trying to manage these conflicts, his fear and lack of coping skills leads him to rely on his old ways of thinking and behaving. With therapy, new mental and cognitive thought processes can be introduced. As a result of our work together in a joint effort of collaboration, Anthony and I, well, Anthony, he defined his goals, and I'm going to help develop them with him over time. But these are the initial goals that we came up with. His self-defined goals are deal with the uncomfortable emotions that express the conflict and demands he feels in his life, find a balance between seeking what he wants and appreciating and maintaining what he has, attend a substance use disorder support group therapy, create a new style of living that accommodates a balance between work and occupation, and love and intimacy. So in conclusion, by reconciling two of the three needs Anthony has, namely the work and occupation task and the love and intimacy task, Anthony will gain a more complete perspective of himself as a whole being, complete and indivisible in movement toward his self-selected goal of wholeness, completion, and actualization. Early in his life, Anthony created a fictional sense of completeness or perfection, a goal toward which he continues to strive for. Once set in early life, it unifies the individual's personality such that every thought and conviction, value, belief, feeling, and action aims at that goal. Because these fictional final goals begin to form so early in life, mistakes are made. Sometimes, like in Anthony's case, there are mistaken goals that guide a person's life. In Anthony's experience, his goal seems to be to work hard at the expense of enjoying life or appreciating the life that he worked so hard to create. In some cases, too, there are mistaken ideas about or approaches to acceptable goals. A mistaken idea is, in Anthony's experience, is that he cannot let himself be vulnerable. Throughout his life, juggling addiction and workaholism, Anthony's mistaken belief that he can't share his feelings with another intimately is often the result of mistaken machoism. According to the Adlerian model, understanding Anthony's needs in a systemic way, taking into account how he sees himself, others, in the world, and his family background, culture, gender, and place in history, and seeking to understand the particular meaning or interpretation that Anthony attaches to his life story, we can, together, understand the whole of Anthony's individual style of living, his movement toward a goal of wholeness, and this will allow us to identify and correct mistakes, reassess and reorient the movement in useful ways, and it will help us celebrate corrections to faulty beliefs and values. A basic premise in the Adlerian approach is that if the therapist can encourage clients to change their thinking, they will then change their feelings and behavior. This means that it is important to work with how the client views the world, how the client thinks, how the client feels, and how the client is acting in the client's world. If the client does not trust the therapy process or the therapist, then the treatment will be ineffective. The client needs to participate in the therapy and form an honest and trusting alliance with the counselor. Also, some of the basic concepts are vague and not precisely defined, which makes it difficult to validate them empirically. Adlerian therapy does not lend itself to evidence-based practice. Critics would say that this approach oversimplifies complex human functioning and is based too much on a common sense perspective.
Hello, Anthony. I'm Matt. I'll be your counselor today.
Hey Matt, thanks for seeing me today. I appreciate it.
Um, so, since this is our first session, I usually just kind of like to get to know people. So why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm 61 years old. You might have seen me on TV. I'm at the point in my life where, I just people told me to come here. People told me you should get some, talk to somebody, talk to a therapist. I don't really believe in the whole therapy industry, and that I've always done things myself. So I'm trying to, it's part of what I'm going through right now is just noticing just negativity in my own self. Like I used to feel a lot. I'm feeling the urge to just get out of myself. And,
Okay. So would you say that that's something that's new for you, or is that something that you've been dealing with, for a longer period of time?
Well, it's fairly new. It's like I don't know. For years and years, I quit smoking for my daughter a while back, 2007. But I'm picking up, smoking. I'm smoking again, and when I smoke, it's kind of related to my drinking, and having a cigarette makes me want to drink and get out of myself. I have a substance use disorder, or I've used drugs in the past growing up. I mean, it's part of my, it was like breathing.
Yeah.
So,
What was growing up like for you?
it was, I don't know. When I was younger, I wanted to get out of my house. I didn't want to be around my house. It was very controlling. I have a younger brother, and yeah, growing up, I took care of my brother. I was given, I thought, a lot of responsibility. My parents were away a lot of the time, and it was up to me to raise my brother. And I don't know if he feels like that, but I felt a lot of pressure, a lot of responsibility as a teenager. And,
I'm hearing a lot about other people, but not so much about how you felt.
Like, what do you mean? Like when I was growing up, I just I felt I wasn't really engaging in my own life. I felt like I was a father figure or somebody that wasn't about me.
That's interesting to me because one of the first things you said to me was that you quit smoking for your daughter.
Yeah.
And now you're telling me about how when you were growing up, you taking responsibility for your brother. So I wonder, do you feel like you have this pattern in your life of like living for other people instead of just for yourself?
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't do I don't know. I don't do things for myself. I feel like I'm at my best when I'm pushed to do things like work. I'm always work. I understand. I'm a workaholic. I've always been like somebody that works a lot, and it's something I can control, or I feel more in control when I'm at work because I know what I got to do from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, and during the day it's all laid out. It's all there's tasks that I can do, and but when I'm left to my own devices, I'm kind of like I don't want to do things for myself.
What I'm hearing is, you seem to care an awful lot about taking care of other people, but it sounds like you haven't done a very good job of taking care of yourself. I mean, one of the first things you said to me was, you're here because other people told you to come.
Yeah.
Do you think it would have ever gotten to a point where we would have just decided to come here for yourself?
No way. I don't think. Like I said, I don't have a lot of faith in the whole therapy. You know, I'm
Mm-hmm.
only. I am here. I feel like I have this whole. I see other people and they seem happy.
Yeah.
But when I'm, even when I'm with other people, I don't feel that joy and happiness. I feel alone. I feel isolated. Um, and maybe I wanna learn how to be happy. I wanna learn how to do things for myself, but I don't know how to do that, and I don't.
Well, I'd like to
Well,
see you learn how to enjoy yourself and be happy. Now that you're here, do you still feel like you're just here for other people, or do you feel like you're here for yourself?
no, I feel like well, talking to you is like it's I can connect with you, so
Mm-hmm.
I feel comfortable talking to you, and I feel like there's things I can learn.
Mm-hmm.
My life's pretty hectic right now. I'm all with my
Yeah.
my job and different projects I'm working on, and um, I want to be. I don't know. I'm glad I'm here.
Yeah.
Maybe being pushed, or I feel like I'm pushed to be here. So
Yeah.
if there's any,
Well, kind of bringing things back to the smoking, it sounds like maybe that's something you want to work on. Is the fact
yeah,
that you're smoking again, is that something that's a little scary for you?
yeah, smoking was always smoking. I gave it up for my daughter, and smoking is it's sort of like in my past, my
Yeah.
pattern of behavior has been like to smoke, and then get comfortable with with drugs. I
Yeah.
grew up with drugs. It's old habits. I don't want to go back. I want to, I have done what is it? I've done some detoxing in the past,
Mm-hmm.
and
I wonder,
work.
when you did that, did you do it for yourself, or did you do it because other people told you to do it?
Yeah, it's mostly because my employer told me to do it, and
Uh-huh.
I got something out of it back then, but I couldn't stick with it. It's
Yeah.
I guess I did it for my daughter. I did it for my wife at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought and life was good. Life was good. It
Yeah.
was, and then I got busy with work. My career started taking off, and
Yeah.
my daughter grew up,
I
and
I wonder, when I hear you talk about this, it seems like a lot of the positive changes you made in your life in the past, had to do with, that feeling of being surrounded by other people and having other people to do good for, to be a better person for.
yeah.
Do you feel like you have anyone in your life like that now?
My daughter's in my life. She's the most important person in my life, and in a relationship with my girlfriend, and we've been together quite a few years.
Mm-hmm.
And she's noticed, and she's one of the reasons that this came up. Is she told me, she feels like I'm getting back to my old ways,
Yeah.
and I don't want to lose that relationship with her.
Mm-hmm.
I want to, figure out, am I kind of backsliding?
Yeah.
Am I, going down a rat hole,
Yeah.
rabbit hole? And I think I'm doing a lot more work. Like work is
Yeah.
driving me, all over the world in different countries, and I have different projects, so I feel pulled in a lot of different directions, and I'm not keeping, my priority of my family up front. I'm kind of, letting work drive me, and I guess I kind of feel like I don't have an anchor. I don't
Yeah.
have a connect. I don't have.
Sounds like you're feeling kind of isolated.
Yeah. I feel isolated even in crowds.
Yeah. Well, if you're worried about these self-destructive behaviors like the smoking and maybe even, substance abuse coming back into your life, my recommendation would be, I think you need to find a better balance. They say when you're working with people with substance use issues, you can't just, um, get clean for yourself, or just for other people. because if you're just doing it for someone else, what happens if that person goes away?
Right.
You have to, do it for yourself, but you also have to surround yourself with that strong support network. And so, even if you're working and moving around, I would try and find ways to remind yourself of the people that care about you and that you care about, and find a way to find a better balance with these people in your life and the things in your life that are important, to motivate you to be better and not, isolate yourself and put yourself in this position where, you're alone with the one person that you don't care about, which seems to be yourself.
Yeah, I feel definitely feel isolated, but I don't feel like like you said, like I'm always trying to take care of other people.
Yeah.
And
maybe the person you got to take care of now, you got to look inward for once.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like I'm not worth it.
We're running out of time. Maybe we can continue this in our next session.
I'd love that. Yeah.
All right, and we're back with Counselor Matt Moseman and Anthony Bourdain.
Mike Ryan.
Played by Mike Ryan. And this is just kind of like a brief, behind the scenes where we talk about what we're trying to do there. So Michael chose to work with Adlerian therapy for his case formulation, and I am trying to kind of throw in some existential therapy techniques to kind of enrich that approach. And in the course of that 10-minute, 30-second session, I think we did a good job of hitting some of the essential techniques and points of the Adlerian approach while kind of throwing in some of the existential stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So, for example, we kind of rushed through the kind of getting to know each other, but I got a little bit of background from Anthony Bourdain. We kind of did an abbreviated version of the subjective and then objective interview, where we kind of get a lot of life history backstory, which we did in a limited sense, and then kind of interrogate that and look for crises and issues. We kind of went through the family constellation in a limited way, both recent kind of contemporary family ties, like Anthony's daughter that he quit smoking for, and kind of tied that into his brother, taking care of him when he was growing up, did some of the early recollections to kind of give us some background. Then it kind of bounced back to me as the therapist, and I interpreted that. How did that kind of feel when I started to kind of bounce back on you and interpret some of those things that you had expressed as
right? So as the client, I think you summarized it really well, and you gave me some motivational interviewing technique. You gave me some positive feedback, something I could grab onto.
And it's kind of in line with the Adlerian theory, where we kind of get the background and then we interpret. In this case, my interpretation was Anthony is really accustomed to doing good things for himself only when it's for other people, and that in the absence of that, he wasn't really taking very good care of himself, like starting smoking again because he's not really feeling that family connection as well. So then I tried to reorient Anthony and encourage him to use some techniques that might help him to curb the, self-destructive behavior that he saw kind of reemerging in his life in the form of the smoking. And in terms of, my contribution to the approach with the existential stuff, I saw a real theme of isolation and loneliness being a big part of, the issues going on in Anthony as portrayed by Michael. And so we kind of also, as a sidebar, talked about kind of dealing with uncertainty of motivation, and definitely addressing those themes of loneliness and isolation. And so I think this was a very successful role play. I hope that you'll agree. And I look forward to hearing what you think about our case formulations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hello, I'm Matthew G. Moseman, and welcome to part 2 of the Anthony Bourdain case formulation and role play that I have put together in collaboration with Michael Ryan. We decided to split our formulation into 2 parts. Michael did kind of a pure Adlerian analysis and case formulation on Anthony Bourdain
then we met up and we did our role play and kind of talked about that and analyzed it. And now I'm adding to that by putting a new case formulation that kind of takes off where Michael left off with the Adlerian case formulation, and putting together a formulation for the treatment of Anthony Bourdain, using that Adlerian approach bolstered with an integrative Adlerian existential approach, using some of the theory of existential therapy to bolster some of the weaknesses of the Adlerian approach to working with an individual like Anthony Bourdain. So in this section of the case formulation, I am going to be giving a summarized overview of the case of the individual, Anthony Bourdain himself, and talk about how best to treat an individual like this from an Adlerian perspective, bolstered from the integration of existential therapy as well. And I hope that you'll enjoy it. So, Anthony Bourdain and his background. I think Michael Ryan did a great job of giving a good overview of Anthony Bourdain's background, but I'll give a brief summary from my perspective. What we know is he was born into a somewhat authoritarian household, one that he was kind of keen to escape, and which led him to have this keen perception of responsibility for some of his younger siblings, particularly his brother, kind of starting this pattern of putting others before himself and considering his obligations in terms of other people. Despite this, or maybe because of the pressure brought on, he, as well as others in his circle, including some of his siblings, he fell into using substances at a pretty early age, in his early teens at the very least, using alcohol and marijuana, something that accelerated in young adulthood when he worked in the culinary industry, being exposed increasingly to harder drugs, using, in addition to alcohol and marijuana, things like cocaine and eventually heroin, along with psychedelic drugs like LSD and mushrooms, pretty much whatever he could get his hands on. And, despite these handicaps, it would seem, eventually, as we all know, he achieved some pretty remarkable success. He became a celebrity chef, later hosting multiple TV shows, even interviewing President Obama, but at the same time had a pretty well-documented and publicized struggle with mental health issues such as depression, as well as substance use. He went in and out of sobriety. And probably the big elephant in the room, as we all know, he committed suicide in 2018. And one of the interesting things about approaching basically a forensic analysis of this case is, we have the benefit of hindsight. We know that he killed himself in the end. And that's a luxury that no therapist or counselor ever has in the moment, knowing that their client is going to kill themselves. We may have signs, people may make suicidal gestures or announce their intention to kill themselves, but, we never know for sure that that's what's over the horizon. But we have an opportunity in retroactively analyzing this case to look at Anthony Bourdain's background and kind of think to ourselves and try and come up with what would we have done, what could we have done to prevent things coming to that end? What therapies, what methodologies, what techniques could we possibly have used to prevent the death of this prominent individual? And that's kind of what I'm going to be delving into as I further explore this case in this presentation. So why advocate for an integrative approach to this specific case of Anthony Bourdain? I think Michael Ryan made a pretty good case for the efficacy or potential efficacy of an Adlerian approach to the case of Anthony Bourdain, but there's also some shortcomings to that approach, particularly regarding this case, the case of Anthony Bourdain, that I think could be remedied by the integration of another therapeutic approach, specifically using the theory of existential therapy and integrating some of that into an Adlerian approach to providing service to Mr. Bourdain. One of the shortcomings that I see most glaringly in the Adlerian approach to treating Anthony Bourdain is this reliance on life goals. There's a lot in Adlerian theory about goals. The methodology is basically, get background, assess an individual, interpret what they tell you, and reorient them and encourage them. But what are we reorienting them towards, and what are we encouraging them to do? At the end of the day, we're talking about goals and reorienting people towards better, more positive life goals. But when we're dealing with an individual who has already achieved so much and most likely surpassed whatever goals they might have had as a younger person, this falls short. What do we do with an individual that already stands atop the pyramid, so to speak? To kind of crib from Maslow and the hierarchy of needs, before his suicide, many people might have described Anthony Bourdain as a self-actualized person. And that's kind of the goal we're always working towards. And in like the more pedestrian practice of therapy with everyday folk, most people are nowhere near accomplishing all their goals. So there's always something to reorient and encourage somebody towards. But when working with an exceptional individual that has achieved more than the vast majority of individuals will ever achieve and become a prominent, if not the most prominent person in their given field, we have to step back and think about, while climbing that pyramid is certainly a helpful ideal for us to push people towards in terms of keeping them healthy and keeping them focused on looking forward in their lives, what is it like for someone who stands atop that pyramid? It's a very lonely place. If we just think about the idea of a pyramid, standing on top of it, there's not room for many other people. And for someone in that position, existential concerns become much larger, in my conception, than they would be for most other people. Meaning is ostensibly important for everybody, but for most people who have real practical needs that they need to fulfill, they need to, make money, support themselves, advance themselves in their career. Meaning is important, but it's not necessarily as meaningful as meeting those practical needs that they have for themselves. When someone no longer has those needs, so to speak, because they are already at the top of their field, because they already have the resources that they need to meet virtually any practical need, meaning itself becomes really the only and most important need of that person. And existential theory excels in addressing that directly, and also addressing the loneliness and isolation that can result from being such a successful, prominent, and wealthy individual. And we can use that to adapt the idea of life goals that we get from the Adlerian approach to goals that are more suited to the pursuit of meaning itself, as opposed to more practical concerns. And that is a shift that we probably would not so easily be able to achieve without integrating elements of existential therapy into the approach. Which kind of brings me to this idea that achieving goals, which seems to be this unmitigated good thing, can itself be very problematic, not just in extremely successful people like Anthony Bourdain, but for anyone that you might work with as a counselor or as a therapist, because we work so hard to achieve goals and we so often feel empty once we've achieved them and don't know where to go from there. And from the perspective of suicide prevention, that's something that I think is important for us all to remember. And the case of Anthony Bourdain could certainly stand as an important example of that, that how do we conceive of setting goals as a therapeutic goal for someone who has already achieved so much? And at what point do we have to reorient that from, the more practical quotidian goals of advancing oneself in the material world towards the more inward endeavor of finding meaning in our lives? And how can that help us support people who may be struggling, even very successful, prominent people, with the lack of a will to live through not having that kind of meaning? So now that I have hopefully made a strong argument for using an integrative approach, incorporating aspects of existential therapy, we can move on to addressing what the goals of this integrative approach would be vis-a-vis treating client Anthony Bourdain. First off, I'd like to address the potential question, now that I've made an argument for the potential efficacy of existential therapy, why retain this Adlerian framework and not just proceed with pure existential therapy with the client? I think there's a lot of strong reasons why the integrative approach is superior to pure Adlerian or existential approaches. One being that existential therapy in and of itself doesn't really have a strong framework, structure, or really any concrete techniques of its own. It's more of a approach that emphasizes working with certain themes and perspectives. Whereas the Adlerian approach has a very strong structural framework that I think is very well suited for being adapted and integrated with the existential approach. Besides the fact that I think that the Adlerian approach has its own advantages on its own for working with a client like Anthony Bourdain. Adlerian theory gives us kind of a step-by-step process that we can use to begin prosecuting therapy with Anthony Bourdain. We begin by establishing rapport. We get a subjective kind of history and life story. We then move on to the objective phase where we kind of interrogate what we have heard to try and pick out points of interest and potential crises and things that we can further examine in the interest of the client. And then that kind of brings us to that stage of interpreting, reorienting, and encouraging the client. In a traditional pure Adlerian approach, we are interpreting what the client gives us with the aim of trying to reorient them to strengthen mainly like friendships and community and social support networks, their work and occupational success, as well as the intimate aspect of their life, which includes close loved ones and family. But these are all relatively material concerns compared to our focus with the existential aspect. But we can use this same framework and approach that we get from the Adlerian therapy and just modify it to interpret reorient and encourage our client, Anthony Bourdain, in light of the goals of existential therapy. So instead of focusing on these material things, although they're not to be completely disregarded, certainly the client could benefit from a stronger social support network and a better work-life balance and an examination of the role of intimacy in his life. What's absent from the Adlerian approach is that interest and focus on finding meaning, examining more intangible issues such as the inevitability of loneliness and isolation, particularly in a successful individual. And so we can kind of use the Adlerian approach as our runway to establish rapport and gain the information that we need from the client, and then adapt its methodology to a more existential view of things, and turn the goal of interpretation and therefore the reorientation and encouragement towards the more intangible issues that may be relevant in a case like Anthony Bourdain's, interpreting what he's feeling, interpreting the events of his life and the way things are developing in his life in a more philosophical direction, helping him to identify new sources of meaning, leading to an increased motivation to continue living, and addressing head-on the more difficult issues of the human experience that might not be so readily touched upon by Adlerian approaches alone. And then by synthesizing these two theories together, we can approach a more positive potential outcome that we would likely be able to get from just using either theory alone. So what would be the path to therapy for someone like Anthony Bourdain? We know from his own words that he was always skeptical of therapy and receiving mental health services in general. So it's unlikely that he's going to be the guy who is just running off the street saying, please, doc, help me, I've got a problem. When he enters into therapy, it's more than likely going to be because of external forces. That either an employer or a loved one or someone else has, extracted a promise from him to try and get some help, and we will be put in this all too common situation for therapists and counselors and mental health providers of working with someone who is not necessarily coming off the street of their own volition. There's some kind of coercion or quasi-coercive dynamic at work just to get this guy in the chair. I think this is an important part of the reason why I've adhered to starting off this relationship with a structural approach that we get from the Adlerian theory. I really think that any therapist who tries to just jump in to an existential conversation with someone like Anthony Bourdain is going to kind of set off his mumbo-jumbo alarm really quick, and you're going to lose what little potential engagement that you might have from the get-go trying to jump in with an approach like that. So we begin with this outwardly professional approach of kind of taking things step by step so that we can try and achieve the buy-in from the client that we need in order to be able to successfully delve into those deeper existential issues that seem to need to be addressed if we are to avert the client's potential future self-harm. From the beginning of this presentation, I've been forthright about the fact that I am certainly benefiting from hindsight in my formulation of the case and the potential treatment avenues for the late Anthony Bourdain. Some people might say, well, doesn't that kind of invalidate this approach? Because nobody could have foreseen that he was going to kill himself. And so what you're saying here doesn't really matter because we never would have thought to apply this approach to someone who nobody could have possibly suspected was headed for this sort of end. And I would reply that I don't think that's the case. I have benefited from hindsight, but I would say that the case of Anthony Bourdain is not an isolated incident. Over the course of the last 2 decades, we've seen a number of similarly prominent, successful individuals in our society at the peak of their careers die by suicide. Anthony Bourdain being one. Other examples that come to mind would be people like Chester Bennington, the lead singer of Linkin Park, a very successful band. The late Kate Spade of the eponymous fashion empire, who also died by suicide. And, of course, the late Robin Williams, probably the most prominent and successful comedian, actor of his generation, by some estimations, who also died by suicide. And they all seem to have this in common, that when they died by suicide, the lay public and mental health professionals alike kind of gawked and wondered, why would this person who seemed to have it all choose to commit suicide? And that makes it a societal phenomenon. There is a pattern here. It's not a freak accident. It's not this isolated occurrence that nobody could have predicted. I think there's enough of a pattern. If you take these cases and you combine them with other cases of highly successful, talented individuals who died maybe not directly by suicide, but through really reckless behavior, like Heath Ledger or Amy Weinstein, that there's something in our society that leads to this happening. I would argue that we do live in a very materialistic society that really focuses on gaining more and more and more and being more and more successful, and that just the general schema of our American society doesn't really provide for what an individual is to do once they achieve that pinnacle of success and wealth and reach the pinnacle of their career. We focus a lot on material success, but not on meaning. And, for that reason, I think that the integration of existential therapy into the treatment of such individuals could potentially be an antidote to this phenomenon that we as mental health providers should make ourselves aware of. That if we have the opportunity to treat people in this kind of situation, we should be aware that when you stand atop that pyramid, that these issues of meaning, of isolation and loneliness become so much bigger and so much more important than everything else that we have been conditioned and accustomed to worry about, that it's a real risk that these successful people who seem to have it all will, fall victim to this existential malaise that can be quite deadly. And so this isn't just a strategic approach to, the theoretical, not yet dead Anthony Bourdain. I would characterize this formulation as the beginning of a strategy specifically tailored for dealing and providing adequate support to individuals in that kind of situation.